Throughout history, freethinkers have outraged the religious with their wacky ideas about the virtues of free speech, reason, and of course, eating babies. Now, God is dying, and it's time to dispose of his remains. From the pits of hell, Satan sends two puppets of the imperialist West and the Zionist Jews against God, Islam, and tiny kittens to bring you their propaganda and conspire for a new world order. This is Secular Jihadists for a Muslim Enlightenment with Ali Rizvi and Armin Navabi.
Welcome everybody to another episode of Secular Jihadists for a Muslim Enlightenment. My name is Ali Rizvi and with me is Armin Navabi for the first time from an undisclosed location.
Did you just say Armin Namazi?
I said Navabi.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm just... Yeah, I said Navabi.
Okay,
and from an undisclosed location, right? Or you don't want to... Yeah, undisclosed location.
It's too late for that. I'm in Philippines.
It makes you sound badass.
Yeah.
And okay, so I'm just going to get ready. Hey, Sarah, how are you? How's it going?
Good. How are you guys?
I'm good. We're very excited that you're back on the show after, such a long time. You were recently on the Bill Maher show on Real Time with Bill Maher, but that was only preparation for this.
Yeah,
big,
I know.
a real big deal. So, we're very happy that you finally made it. And
Awesome.
Actually, the gratitude is all ours. So, for those who don't know and who've been living under a rock, our guest today is Sarah Haider. Sarah Haider is the executive director of Ex-Muslims of North America. She was just on Real Time with Bill Maher, as we mentioned, a couple of weeks ago, and we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about a whole bunch of things. And right now she's organizing a conference that's in actually next week, in just a few days, October 19th, Saturday, October 19th in New York City, When Rights and Religions Collide. It looks absolutely amazing. The web link and the URL is rightsandreligions.com. And we're going to talk about that as well as you come on. So first of all, Sarah, the first thing I think people want to... Oh, by the way, yeah, we also met and we hung out in Amsterdam. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Yes.
That was a lot of fun. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we'll talk about that a little bit. So I want to talk about the your TV appearance on HBO first, because I know that everybody wants to hear about it. And I'm going to tell you a really tiny story. Okay, is that when we were all in Amsterdam, I was hanging out with all of these ex-Muslims, and the next generation are really good looking. So there's Harris Sultan, Jimmy Bungash, Armin Navabi. These guys are getting up at 8 a.m. and hitting the gym, and they were just coming and telling me all this stuff about, Ali, come on, you got to work out. You're getting really fat and all this stuff. And I felt so bad that when I came back, since then, I've cut sugar completely almost out of my diet.
Wow. Congratulations.
Thank you. Except for one night, the night when you were going to be on Bill Maher, I sat down, put my kid to sleep, made sure nobody's going to bug me, and I got a bowl of chocolate and peanut butter ice cream, and I had that while I was watching it.
Oh, wow.
Because it was a special occasion. It's something I've been waiting to see for a very long time. Just sort of one of us going on a mainstream national show. I've been watching Bill Maher since the 90s. I'm a very old man, since he had the politically incorrect show. Mm-hmm. So, I think it's fantastic.
Can I also add something before you go?
Yeah.
I know, Sarah, I know so many people have been talking about this whole HBO thing with you, and I know it's been repetitive for you. But I just want to mention that this is a big deal for a lot of us. And I can't imagine how many other ex-Muslims out there that can't even speak, and can't even reach out to you, can't even post about it, for them to be able to see somebody go and just be introduced as an ex-Muslim. Even before you started speaking, the fact that on such a mainstream level and such a, on a show with that many audience, somebody came out and said oh yeah, this is an ex-Muslim, founder of Ex-Muslims of North America. I think just the introduction by itself was a huge, the whole point, one of the main points of Ex-Muslim of North America is to normalize it. And I think that was normalized being an ex-Muslim, normalized leaving Islam. And I think right after the introduction, I think we just leaped forward 10 steps just by the introduction, right? And then everything else was just amazing. I mean, you were amazing throughout the show. But I don't know who's responsible for getting you there, but thank you on behalf of all the people that can't tell you that they're grateful for you being able to do that. Thank you to you and your entire team that made that possible.
Oh, well, I mean, it was just, I don't even know how to describe it. It was kind of wild to get to go on. I mean, it definitely from a normalizing perspective. I mean, I would love to get to a place where this is not, that I don't get to be introduced that way, because it doesn't matter that anyone is ex-Muslims of anything, like that would be a wonderful world, and right. I would love to help build that world so we can just all move on. And like, I mean, this is an identity that for me, it's not an identity really, truly. And when people call it an identity, it kind of irks me, because to me, it's just this label that I'm putting on temporarily for political purposes, truly. I mean, we need rights. We don't have the right to life in many parts of the world, and we are ostracized and abused and all sorts of things. Like, there's such extreme stigma against leaving religion in Muslim communities that, for now, this is something I'm putting on while we don't have a right to live freely, and while we don't have a right to practice and to speak without fear of retribution. So this is just a label that I have for the moment. I would love to not feel the need to put it on and to represent a movement, at some point. I mean, that's the real goal, right? Like, and I think that's any charity group says that I would love to create a world in which my charity is not necessary.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And how did it come together?
No, but just to point out, like, right now, the label ex-Muslim is necessary, but we're using it in the hope for one day it becomes unnecessary.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
So how did it all come together? Like, just.
I don't know. I mean, their producer reached out to me. They've been wanting me on for a little while. I don't know exactly how they heard of me, but must have been through multiple things. I'm sure they do a lot of research. And then they told me, well, they have this date, or we can figure out sometime next year. So if this doesn't date, I mean, I guess they book like very, 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 very far in advance. So it was just great that it happened to work out at a time where we had the Awesome Without Allah campaign. And so the timing was great. And so I was thrilled to say yes. I mean, it was just one of those experiences where I feel like it happened to somebody else, like it didn't actually happen to me. And I remember, because I watched the show as well, like all the time I watched the show. And then the way Bill says, I was talking to Muhammad or someone about it, the way Bill says, like, and, my guest for you tonight or whatever, and he introduces everyone in this very specific way, and then he turns to the guest. And I have that whole, like, motion, those words and that motion, I had it memorized in my head because I've watched the show so many times. And then I was on the other side of it, and I was watching this little set, and I was waiting, like, they were, like, ushering me, like, go. I was in the back, and they were like, "Oh, like, now he's about to introduce you." And then he said, and my next guest, whatever, he said my name, and I walked up. And then from that point till the end of it, I don't even know what happened. It went by like a second. It went by so quickly. Like, I have no idea what happened. I mean, the whole time I was so nervous, and I think a lot of people who've watched me a lot and like know my mannerisms and how I behave knew that I was nervous, but I hope that people who don't know me didn't know how nervous I was. But it obviously it went by very quickly. I was a little bit on edge because of the way that the questions are asked, because they're not really planned so intensely beforehand, and sometimes I request that, in a conversation. But with the live, I mean, one, that he's watching the time the whole time. There's like a little clock that's like ticking down. Wow. So he's watching, like, he knows, like, on the other side, like what the audience doesn't see, like, he knows that he has a certain amount of time that he has to get through a certain, these such and such questions. So he's moving you along. And I kind of felt like I didn't, I prepared as best as I could, but I couldn't get a lot of the things that I wanted to say said. And that wasn't Bill's fault. That wasn't I don't really blame myself. I blame myself a little bit, but not like too much. But it's just definitely the format is very difficult.
Well, it's a 5-minute interview. I mean, that's the problem with TV, right? Like, it's like 5 or 6 minutes for that segment. But I think I also watched Overtime afterwards, and that's actually available for everybody to watch on YouTube.
And even the Overtime one was weird though, because it was like some questions for me, and then and then we started talking about Trudeau and brown's face or blackface or whatever he was doing. And then it turned into a race conversation about black fathers with Andrew Sullivan and Heather McGhee. And I had things to say about, because you
had something to say about brownface, Sarah?
About the Trudeau stuff, like about the
only brown person on the panel?
I mean, I did have something to say about that, and I wanted to participate, but then it got to be this very personal thing between the two of them, and I just felt like I don't have a space to push in. But I guess you really have to be very aggressive and like elbow your way into the conversation. And it wasn't just me; it was this other guy in the middle too, who was Tim, I think his name was, who was just sort of like, I would like to speak.
Actually, this is something that I think you are getting better at, like when it comes to directing the conversation in the way you want. Because I remember in Amsterdam, we get to that later. That the conversation was not, they were asking very dumb questions, and the whole thing got very boring. And I always feel like people waste having you on the panel, because when you're on the panel, you have so many interesting to say, and people don't ask the right questions for you to say them. But were you happy with the questions that were brought up at the HBO? Like, are you overall satisfied with the direction of the conversations and the things that you got to say? Obviously, it's not perfect, but overall, were you happy?
I'd give it a B.
Okay.
I'd give it a B.
You talked about the hijab and the different companies like selling hijab sport products. You talked about the billboards that XMNA has up. You talked about the growth of the ex-Muslim movement, which we're not getting to that because we talked about that many times already. So I think overall, like, it was pretty diverse, and it was 5 minutes, and you touched on
it was so hard, because I had to, in my prep, I was like, okay, what are the most important things that I have to say?
Right.
And which meant not saying a lot of really important things. It meant picking the top, what I felt to be for this audience in this moment to be the most important things to say, which was actually a really, really difficult thing for me to do, because I have 20 topics, 30 topics, 40 important things that all feel like they're super important. And I was really conscious, like, of going up there and knowing that for a fact, and I know this did happen, where there were ex-Muslims who were unhappy with the way that I approached the issue, right? There were people who were unhappy, but I think it's also like what you said. It's the doing something new, and exposing ex-Muslims on a bigger scale. And then, it wasn't really until until a couple of days before the episode, that the filming or shooting, that it hit me that, oh my God, there's going to be a lot of people who are definitely going to be disappointed with the choices that I make here, because they're feeling like I'm going and I'm representing them. And I always flinch at the idea of representing anyone. I mean, it's not me, I don't want to represent a group of people. And I think there's something about people who kind of put themselves on the stage and say, speaking as a member of the blah, blah, blah community. Like, there's something about that I find distasteful. And I find that to be, it's one thing for me to say, I am an ex-Muslim, an ex-Muslim, right? And there's a lot of people like me, and here are the political rights, here are the whatever, and to generally talk about the issues versus painting yourself as an authority. And it's kind of a weird thing, I know, for someone in my position to say, because I think I can probably very fairly call myself an authority on these issues just by virtue of being executive director of the biggest ex-Muslim organization around, really. But still, there's something about it that I find to be distasteful and I don't like doing. And so that was definitely something on my mind. And as to your point about panels being boring, I've sort of made it for the next year, not all of them, but the next year, I'm definitely going to limit my appearances in general and conversations that I choose to have. I mean, a lot of people want to have me on, and then they just say that it's the same conversation. Every time it's the same conversation, and I just feel like that's not valuable anymore. So I have had the benefit of speaking to some really interesting people and having interesting conversations more recently, just as my audience has expanded a little bit. But I had a podcast with this woman named Julia Galef. She's really interesting. Her podcast is called Rationally Speaking, I believe. Which is very interesting because she's a very thought-provoking person. She's very intellectual, and she had me on, and we just touched on some issues, and then just went off on somewhere else. And it was one of my favorite conversations, precisely because of that. Precisely because I felt like, for the first time, I wasn't trotting the same similar ground again and again. I mean, we talked about ways of having, civil discourse, responsibility that one has as an activist to be intellectually honest, and whether that gets in the way of actually being a good activist or being an effective activist, which I think that was a point where Julie and I think Julie was surprised by my answer, because I think she expected me to say that you can be a very effective activist and be 100% intellectually honest. She expected me to say yes to that, and I said no, that I think that there are trade-offs that you have to make in order to be able to appeal to a broad base, activate a large group of people, mobilize a large group of people, and still be as deeply nuanced as you want to be. And I think there are trade-offs to be made there, and they make me as a person deeply uncomfortable all the time. And this is why, like, the role of an activist is just not something that fits me, I think, at all. It's just something that, like, I am now, for lack of a better word. Like, this is just what my life is. But it's a role that I find doesn't suit me and my personality, but perhaps that's a good thing, Actually,
you know what? That's a really good point, because I noticed that a lot when activists go into politics. Like, for example, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Ilhan Omar.
No, please stop.
These people. Hear me out. Okay. Just, oh my God, this is like name. But what they do, I'm not praising anybody or denouncing them. I'm just saying that when these people were activists, right, they could say all of this stuff because they had this audience that were representing an audience of, say, like Ilhan Omar is representing Muslims, so she would say all this stuff about Israel. And then through that activism, she goes into politics, and now the same games don't apply. She can't go out. Now she's representing a much larger community, or she's representing herself. I mean, this whole thing becomes an issue, and now she can't get away with all the stuff that she could before.
I don't agree, but I don't agree with you guys. I don't agree with Sarah. I do think that we have many examples in history of people that were extremely nuanced, and yet were also the leaders of huge activists, like Voltaire, right?
Who was it? He wasn't an activist in the way we would call. No, but he was an intellectual. Is not the same thing as an activist.
No, but he was both.
Writing a pamphlet. No. He wasn't leading people on the street and mobilizing them. Was that what he was doing?
He was hiding people in his house, right?
Okay, that's not what I mean. That's not what I mean. I mean, marching. I mean, that's not the same as being an intellectual leader or being part of an intellectual tradition. I mean, then you can say all philosophers are activists by that degree, but they're not. All philosophers are not activists, even if they've led an intellectual movement.
Do you have to have marches to be able to be an activist? Like, is that the standard?
I think activist means that you have certain. You see the world as having certain policy or social problems, like social ills, and you are working on the ground with people, with politicians, with whoever you need to work to make those changes.
Voltaire. That's
no, but
Voltaire.
that's not the. But that's not. But I would say no. I would say Voltaire was not primarily an activist. I wouldn't even call him secondarily an activist. I would say he's a philosopher.
He was meeting with politicians trying to change policies on the ground.
Let me add to that. I agree with Sarah here. So, in activism, there's an element of community organizing. Okay. Right. And when you're talking about community organizing, you're talking about pleasing a lot of people all the time.
Mobilizing, right? I mean, the word is mobilizing. Right. That's very
You have to mobilize. Now, for instance, if someone is a writer or that's what they're doing, then they're just writing about their thoughts and what they think, and they're doing it honestly, and they don't really have to worry about getting donors or getting more and more people and not pissing off certain people. What activists have to do is they have to get a big group of people together. Writers don't have to do that.
Right. But mobilizing, Voltaire did that when he came back to Paris. When he eventually came back to Paris, the whole of the city was.
That wasn't the primary purpose.
He got so angry with one of the kings or princes, I forgot, that he wasn't following it. He stole the guy's painting, and then he got arrested for it. But again, anyways, I don't want to get in. I don't want to argue. I disagree with both of you. But
no. This is an example. So the example of Voltaire is one. I'm not enough familiar with Voltaire's life to be able to counter that point.
Okay.
But I do think in general that mobilizing people is something that requires dampening of nuance and framing things in as easy to digest.
Slogans.
Slogans are by their very nature, I think,
simplistic. Yeah,
there's an element of anti-intellectualism about sloganeering.
I understand.
Right?
I'm just saying there are few peoples in history that managed to be intellectual and yet phrase things in such a powerful and beautiful way that appeals to the masses as well. They're few and far in between, and Voltaire was one of them. Voltaire was popular among intellectuals and the masses, right? He wrote stories. He communicated in stories and also very nuanced conversation. But
I don't think. I mean, regardless, it's not whatever. It's kind of strange to bring up an example of someone so long ago, because activism back then is not activism today, and you're not mobilizing the same group of people in any case. You're definitely not. I mean, they're. Okay, go ahead.
Question though, when you said people were unhappy with yours, what did they say?
Oh, a lot of different things. I don't remember because I just let it slide off of me.
Okay.
Because I knew it was coming. But a lot of different people had a lot of different problems.
Any of them good?
I think in
Any
general,
of them legit?
I think in general there what I noticed that I took note of was that there were some people who were upset that I didn't focus as much on just ex-Muslim, like just the apostasy stigma specifically, like we're dying, right? Like there's a death penalty. I mean, I did, but there's some people who thought that, because I immediately pulled it back and I said that we're talking about a broader problem as well. We're not just talking about the specific problem of ex-Muslims being murdered on the streets. Yes, of course that's happening. Yes, apostasy laws, but they have a broader, effect on the intellectual discourse. So I pulled it back, and I think people were not happy that I made the conversation broader. But I thought for my purposes,
I think that's good, because we're not constantly trying to play the victim card, and I appreciated you actually doing that. But can I give you a better criticism that actually applies?
All right, let's do it.
Okay. Yeah. The part that where they say, like, you mentioned that the New Zealand thing where the women were wearing the hijab, that was not a good idea. That's not the best way to show solidarity with the victims of the shooting. I agree with you that. But then you suggested something else. You suggested that maybe use zakat to give to charity. That would be a better way of doing solidarity. And I don't agree with that. By the way, I might be completely wrong about this, right? But I just don't like, when religions do good things, they're using it as a branding for a lot of horrible things they do. It's like a sugar coating for a poison pill. And zakat is one of those things, right? And I do want to completely remove, like, the religions survive by pretending that to be able to do good things, taking care of orphans, being nice to your neighbors, having any sort of morality, doing charity, that's a religious thing. At least they're doing that. Yeah, they're doing suicide bombing, blah, 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 all of that stuff, molesting children. But hey, there's a good side of it as well. They're doing charity, which is nonsense. This is just a PR front of religion. And I don't like religious branding of charity, especially because how often it's misused. Religions do charity, and it's often done in a poor way. And the whole point of zakat is to bring money towards the ummah, right? And it's used for religious reasons, especially in countries like, for example, in Iran. I don't like to promote Islamic branding of charity, and I want to show people that not only charity is possible with that religion, charity is often better with that religion, right? And that's why I don't want to...
So I'll push back on that. First of all, the reason I included it, and this is just a tangential point, we'll move on, but the reason I included it was just to show that don't make better the enemy of best kind of thing. But there's a bad way to do it, there's a slightly better way to do it, or there's just a positive way to do it in general. In my opinion, the thing to have done, the best thing she could have done, the better thing is zakat. The bad thing is wearing the hijab. The best thing of all would have been to say, look, I'm not Muslim. I don't agree with anything that's in these books. And yet, I think, these are citizens of our country, and what's been done to them is horrific. And I stand with them and I stand by them. And I think that would have been even better, just to talk about, we have expectations of, freedom to live, freedom to practice, freedom to speak in this country, and anyone who is targeting Muslims because of their beliefs is they're actually going against Western values, totally. And they're attacking those values, and I think that would have been the best thing to do. I mean, that would have been the best thing, but there's still a better thing that she's not going to do the best thing, and I think I'll bring it up as an option, but I think that from the point of view that Jacinda Ardern was, coming from, where she's not coming from this very deeply rooted, let's uphold civil society norms. She's not really thinking about it that way. She's thinking, I want to show the Muslim community I care about them. That's her main motivating factor there. So that's why I gave her this better option. But so that's whatever. That's that.
But I honestly, I think that's a worse option than wearing the hijab, because the most dangerous part of Christianity is love your neighbor. The most dangerous part of Islam, I think, is be kind to orphans or give zakat. That's more dangerous than the rest of the thing, because if I don't
agree with you. I don't agree with you. Just this sugarcoating thing. I mean, I think that's all. That's okay. Go ahead.
No. Sarah, answer that, and then we'll move on from.
But can I give you an example before you answer that? Imagine if Hitler, right, did all the shitty things that he did.
Hitler?
Just a second, Ellie. He did all the shitty things that he did, and the Nazis did the Holocaust, and all the 6 million Jews, plus the gypsies and the gays. I don't forget the gypsies and the gays and the handicaps, because most people just remember the Jews. But all of those people were killed. But on top of all of that, he also went to poor people in Germany, and he had pictures of himself feeding them, giving them food, bringing them gifts. I think if Nazism included that, if Hitler's story included that, it would have been a much more dangerous ideology. I'm so glad that when you look at Hitler's life, there's very few things that positive that you could find, because if you found just a few drops of positive here and there, Nazism would survive a lot longer. This is why communism lasts a lot longer, because communism, if you just look at it, it just sounds so fluffy and beautiful, like, oh, it's about equality and poor people, bringing poor people and making them equal. So communism survived longer, even though it has killed more than Nazism, because it just by just a surface of it, it has the sugar coating. Nazism doesn't. Nazism is so purely evil that there's no it didn't survive. It didn't survive in power for half a generation. It only survived half a generation to be in power, right? I'm not saying Nazism gone, but I'm just saying Islam and Christianity and all these things, these sugar coatings, that's what makes them survive. right? It's not the hijab. It's the, hey, let's like kill the kafirs, but also take care of the orphans and give zakat. These are what makes these religions more dangerous. Anyways, I'm going to stop.
Yes, Sarah, go on.
Well, here's the thing. So, I mean, you have a very interesting way. So what is, in the end, what is the religion? I mean, is it Islam just there? What it really is the poison in between, and the outside is just this dressing on top that's really not part of Islam.
It is part of Islam, and that's what makes it a dangerous.
So it's not a sugarcoat. It's not a sugarcoat. It's not a sugarcoat. It's part of the pill, right? And the pill itself is bittersweet.
Well, the pill, right? The sugar coating is part of the pill.
No, but a sugar coat. But the effect of a sugar coat, the reason you have a sugar coat is to make the bitter part easier to swallow. I feel like that's not true. Like, I think that's a way to look at religion that would miss why religion is so appealing to people. It's not a trick. It's like, aha, I gotcha. Like,
no, it's not by design. No. It's a survive. It's not like just because it made it survive, it doesn't mean that some people would sit down and like, how could we make this evil thing, like make people accept it, like, aha. Like, it wasn't like that. It was like, it's just like the survival of the memes. They survive because they have these beautiful parts in them, not because somebody intentionally said, like, let's.
Well, I actually don't. So one disagreement I have there is I don't think that's why religion survived, is because of the beautiful parts. I think the beautiful parts is just it's used primarily for PR purposes, and on the other hand, it also allows us to use, Muslims to use, like, everyone has good moral, tendencies, and it sets you on a path to feeling like a good person, to doing some good deeds, your good deed of the day, in a way that's responsible from a Muslim perspective for your community. But I don't think that's anywhere near the thing that keeps religion alive. I don't think it's the charity, or I don't think it's these.
Oh, come on! If it hadn't, if Islam was purely evil, of course it wouldn't survive.
No. It's not about purely evil. It's literally something like charity is not. If you deleted zakat right now as a line item, like from the things that are from Islam, I think it would still be an extremely
but not just zakat. If you take all of the fluffy rainbow and butterfly parts out, then it wouldn't last.
I don't think the fluffy and rainbow parts are the reason people are there.
No.
Okay.
So
that's what it is.
Okay.
I think that is one way that an individual Muslim can feel good about being a Muslim, and can
exactly.
One way that but I don't think that's why they stay in the faith. No, I don't think that's why they stay in the faith, and I don't think that's the main appeal of the faith either.
No, but it would be so hard.
So let's cut out zakat.
Okay,
what else? What are the other fluffy parts that you think are useless, that are just sugarcoating?
They're not
Islam?
Useless. Of course, you should take care of orphans, but I'm just saying.
Right. But sugarcoating. But even if I really think that there are a lot of these. I think the main appeal of religion is something so much deeper.
Right.
And I worry that when we're just focusing on these specific parts of it, that we're not providing people with something that can act as a substitute to this deeper question that they have, and to this deeper sense of
I didn't say though that's the main appeal. I understand that the main appeals are not that. The main appeals are community, sense of belonging, sense of significance,
meaning and purpose,
and all of that. I understand. I just say that I understand that that's the main appeal, but it would have been very difficult to see this as a source, see Islam or Christianity as a source of all of that, if once you look at it, there was nothing beautiful that you could hang on to say, yeah, this is the answer. You need those bells.
I don't agree. I just think people would find a way to be a part of it anyway. I mean, there are other cults and religions that don't have a charitable sectors, Scientology, let's say, but cults in general generally don't have the same kind of thing.
Like, I'm looking at the ones that became so big and survived for thousands of years. Obviously,
but there are a lot of reasons. There are a lot of reasons they survive for thousands of years.
But, Scientology has.
You're right. It functions in that PR sense. It has a PR purpose. I don't think an individual individual Muslim looks. I mean, when you were a Muslim, when you doubted, were you like, oh, but Islam has zakat? Like, did that matter to you?
Scientology, yeah, I did. Okay, Scientology has a lot of things, sugar coatings, by the way. Like, people's mental health, taking care of it. This is the right way. People don't understand. We can't,
they're anti-psychiatry.
Yeah, anti-psychiatry. Yeah, because they say they have the answer. People say like they're against misery. They're against people's sadness. It sounds fluffy. They all have to make it sound beautiful.
Again, you keep saying it in a way where you said that I don't think it's by design, but then you still use the phrase sugarcoat, which means that like a sugarcoat literally is by design something to make a bitter pill go down.
But it looks like it's by design, just like in evolution. When you look at animals, it looks like it's by design, even though it's not. And we're like, oh, why do we have eyes to see? Well, it doesn't work like that because it wasn't intentionally designed for us to see.
I don't think the charitable inclination of religions serve to, like, their primary function is to be a PR mechanism or even to help people feel good about their faith. I think their purpose is something else. I think their purpose is to inculcate a more, right, a common, like a common culture of
but that's not what
giving
I'm saying.
to others. But that's the real reason that
but I'm not saying that was the original reason. I'm just saying what it ends up doing. Again, it's the other way around. But again, Ali is really trying to move on.
Guys, we gotta move. Yeah, we're gonna move this along. And I kind of, from a perspective of showing solidarity, I do think I kind of am more on Sarah's side on this as well.
That's fine.
Armin, I don't know why that's happening today. This is crazy.
That's okay. No, this is fun.
So I wanted to actually just talk about, how you were saying that people are upset. And this is a general thing that I kind of want to touch on before we moved on to your organization and your event, which I want to talk about, is that, well, I'll put it this way. A long time ago, I did a TV segment too. And I had mentioned, the guy had asked me something like, well, what is it like? Do you worry about your security walking around? So I had mentioned something. I was like, it used to be a lot worse many years ago, where you'd have to worry about what you said. But now I've noticed that people are getting more and more comfortable with criticism of Islam, and they're more accepting of it. And when I went back, I had loads and loads of messages slamming me. They're like, what do you know? I have to look out for my security and things like that. So there are people, for instance, who may say that, well, Ali, you came from a privileged background. Well, this probably applies to you too, that you came from privilege, saying your parents accepted you and so on. And it's not like that for more of us. So it comes down to that representation thing. So, when you're heading an organization like you do, how do you deal with that kind of criticism? That kind of criticism
that I don't reflect ex-Muslims, the ex-Muslim experience.
You can only represent yourself. You can't represent everyone.
I mean, for the first thing is, well, how to know, how to know. And I would say that, next to Muhammad Sayyid, I probably know more ex-Muslims, like literal numbers wise. And I've heard more stories than possibly anyone. Just because of the size of XMA and all the people that we've screened and all the people that we've worked with throughout the years. But it's still hard to gauge truly what the experience is of your everyday ex-Muslim. So there is the ex-Muslim that joins XMNA. That's a certain kind of person, and they have a certain kind of experience. That might look different than the standard ex-Muslim. They don't join XMNA. They just exist in, the Western world somehow, right? And maybe they don't feel the need to join. So it could be that they're so liberal, their families are so liberal that they don't feel the need to join. It could also be the other way, where the families are so conservative they would never dream of even typing up ex-Muslim onto their, phone, right? So there's a lot of reasons why we might not represent the standard ex-Muslim experience. So I mean, not to get too deeply academic about it, but you can go and think of 1,000 different reasons why you might feel hesitant to say that you represent anyone's experience. And unless we have a perfect poll that's spanning all throughout the Muslim world, there's no way to know. But I can safely say, I think, from what I do know, that I have had a relatively easy time of it compared to other ex-Muslims that I've worked with,
here.
you know, and I hear the kinds of stories that just shock me, you know, and that was part of the reason that, you know, myself and Muhammad both were like, we have to start this, we have to do something, because we feel like we were both better off than a lot of the other people that we were speaking to, especially speaking to them in person was something so strange, you know, in DC, meeting them, and, you know, in New York, meeting them in you know, these real human beings, and they were suffering things that I couldn't have imagined. So certainly we don't represent, but I think that that's also, you know, not my duty isn't to reflect in my own experience necessarily everything that every ex-Muslim has gone through or the average Muslim has gone through. It's just to do my best to understand it to the extent that I can, do my best to figure out what is the average ex-Muslim going through, you know, what are the needs of this population, and then how we can best address them.
I'm so glad that you're like this, because a lot of civil rights movement, civil rights activists, they try to make it about them. And you haven't fallen into that. Especially a lot of people that talk to you always try to make that about you. Like, how has it been so hard for you? And I want more of the activists, especially in Western countries, who are like, yeah, no, it's not about me. I'm fine. This is about other people. This is like, especially ex-Muslim stuff. This is the civil rights movement of our time. I think it's number one. It should be number one, which it isn't. So I'm glad that you guys are now becoming bigger and bigger. And I think a lot of people miss your intention or our intention. They think like we're trying to tell people like, oh, look at our life. Everything is so hard for us. Where it's not. Right? We're not doing this because we have it hard.
But we know that there's a problem.
Yeah,
I mean, let's say, you know, you have problems like there's a homelessness problem, there's an addiction problem. Usually the people that are the most afflicted by certain, you know, social ills, they're not the ones that are out there speaking. They're usually the ones that have got away somehow, that have recovered somehow. Those are miraculous stories. Those are hard to find, people who have come out of that situation and they're whole, and then they have the energy to do something like that. That's hard to find. They exist, of course, but it's hard to find. So really, it's up for the people that were peripheral, like that, where we were close enough that we could see it. You know, that it's not to say that I had to meet somebody, a stranger, to see this. I knew it even when I was a Muslim. I saw it in my community. I saw people like this. I saw, you know, people in my family, extended family, who were living through things that I would hate. That would be hell for me to live the way that they lived. Right. So it was peripheral enough that it felt close, you know, like it was felt near, it was within my line of sight, but not so close that I feel that I'm, you know, I mean, and this is, I guess, even a privilege to be able to say this, but I feel like I have enough distance to be able to approach it from an intellectual lens, which I think can be very, very hard when you're super close. And I've noticed this with people who are ex-Muslims who have suffered so deeply, and it was recent. You know, I mean, it's different if you suffered deeply, but it's been 10 years, it's been 20 years, you've recovered, you've moved on, versus it happened last year, or it's happening now. It's happening to you now. You know, I think it destabilizes you. It's a very normal thing, right? It's a very normal thing for that to happen, such that you might not end up being active in the way that would be most effective, you know, and in couching your message. You might say things in the way that you want, what you want to say, rather than what needs to be heard, which are those are different things. You know, there's a difference between what would really gratify me to get out there versus what is the lack in the public knowledge. You know, where is the biggest hole in the discourse, that what is the first plug that needs to be plugged right now, right?
Yeah. But it's actually almost a natural selection kind of thing, that the people who will be talking about it will naturally be those who are able to talk about it more. So it is not really an accident or a coincidence that people like us are talking about it. The majority of people are talking about it are people like us, because both the people who are victimized, who are at threat of, you know, from whether it's governments or societies or just their families disowning them, they're not the ones who are generally going to be vocal. The majority of them are going to be closeted anyway. So the voices that you're genuinely going to hear are just more likely to be the ones that are able to speak out. So a lot of times it's a matter of
Right.
Not a matter of will necessarily, but it's a matter of the people who end up speaking out for it.
Guys, can we move on to the upcoming conference that Sarah is having, because we're getting close to the very end?
Let's
and
do
I want
that.
to talk about the topics that, like why that conference is happening and some interesting and why people.
So before, I have just one quick question for you before you go on. Like you have this, and this is something I've wanted to. I think we may have talked about before, but whenever you have new followers coming in, when you do a big appearance, you do have this little tweet thread where you talk about, I'm liberal, I'm a feminist. And this, you define yourself in those terms, and it seems like you want to dissuade a lot of the sort of far right types. Why is that important to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that happens every time. I've noticed that as my follower count grow, my goal is not to just have more followers, because if that was the case, just to have more fans throughout my platforms, it would be really easy to do that. I think it would be really easy to just repeat the same message, hammer it home again and again in the most dramatic fashion.
Right.
And that would be, that would be the way to get a ton of followers really, really quickly. But there's a certain group of people that I want to be speaking to. There's a certain group of people who I think that I can speak to. I think that they are the kinds of people who can change what's going on. And that's not necessarily the far right anywhere. I mean, not to say that I would actually talk to them. Sure. I would talk to those people. I don't mind talking to anybody. There's nothing personal about it. But I think that there's a lever that I can pull. Right. There's a group that I can speak to who speaks my language, I speak theirs, and I feel like they're the people who need to hear this. And so I want to be the kind of speaker and the kind of activist who is somewhat appealing to that group, or if I'm not appealing entirely, at least they're not disgusted by me right off the bat, right? If they're just seeing, these horrible tweets from me, and then the far right Hindu, like whatever, whatever those guys are, right? And they have all these, horrible memes about Muslims all over in my replies. People can't help but judge somebody, even though they shouldn't. Once you get to a certain follower count, especially on Twitter or on Facebook, you really can't control that anymore. No. But to the extent that I can, I want to do what I can. I know that I'll lose track of it. I already have lost track of it to some degree. You can't put the the bull back in the barn or whatever it is, right? The saying is that.
Yeah. So I'm glad you said that, because I remember I feel like we talked about this before, but actually that's very important to me too. That's a place where we both align. So,
but just to to give credit to I know it's hard to do that, but I think you have done a better job than most people. Like it's easier for people to dismiss me as far right or whatever, even though I don't understand why. But and Ali is usually I've seen dismissed as too far left. I see that they do that.
Oh, I'm the regressive.
You're the regressive. Yeah. So people have boxed us into, but I don't see that with you, Sarah. I think a lot of people, the way you have managed to present yourself, a lot of people from all sides do understand that you think about your positions very carefully and the way you present yourself, and they will look ridiculous if they do want to box you into any of these positions. Like they are afraid of doing that because they know that they're going to look ridiculous. So your attempts have paid off, if that's what you're saying.
To some degree. I mean, I hope that everything you said was exactly right. I mean, I'm not fooling myself enough to I think that there are some people you can never win over who are waiting for you to trip, and you're a human being. You're going to make a mistake. You're going to do something stupid, or you're going to be in a certain kind of mood for a couple of months because you've been smeared by the wrong person or something. That happens to all of us. And I think it's very, very hard to maintain a balance, and I would never expect anyone to. And now that I've been a public figure for some time, I'm a lot more forgiving of other public figures. When they make mistakes, I'm like, what? Maybe they're just having a bad day. And they're just, we're all human beings. Maybe we're just having a bad day. But I definitely, it's the I guess the tension between what is the point of my activism as a person? So on the one hand, I want to just speak my truth, whatever that means, quote unquote, right? What a horrible thing to say, my truth, right? But just speak and to just get it out, right? Like just to get it out, and that it's just an expression platform, right? So that would be the first way, right? And I think, Armin, to some degree, that's your approach a little bit, is just this is your expression platform. You want to say whatever you want to say as you see it, you know, the truth as you see it. For me, it's just to clarify, it's not that I lie, you know, I never lie, but I choose not to partake in certain conversations.
You pick your battles.
Unless I feel very, very confident that I can defend myself, you know, unless I feel very, 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 so I have a very high bar of when I feel like it's right to poke into something. Of course, I don't always, I'm not like I'm not perfect about this, and sometimes I just poke into something stupid. But what I do see that there's a duty there for public activists, especially in the ex-Muslim movement, because I'm on edge all the time. I don't want to mess this up. You know, we have a shot and we have a movement, and it's growing. It's incredible. But like you were saying earlier, Ali, like that it's just wild to see that this has had as much success as it has. And now I'm like, crazy. Oh God, I don't want to mess it up.
and you're under scrutiny too, right? I mean, everybody is, like, with every tweet and everybody thing that you say is going to get dug up. Like, it's just...
And it's right? I mean, it's impossible. We're human beings. It's an impossible standard. But people will, if any of us at all tweet something stupid, the next day we're all gonna get smeared, you know, and which is wild. Which is just, I think it's so toxic, and this way of demonizing people for just the slightest, you know, miscalculations or just maybe a funny opinion. Is just, I think it's so disgusting that it happens. Nevertheless, it does.
I think that activist writer thing, because I don't really, I'm more of I'm not really mobilizing anybody. That's not my thing. So I like joking around on stuff like for Twitter. It's just a joke thing. I mean, if it's serious, I wrote a book. That was it. That was me being serious. But I'm joking around, and people tend to hold every tweet to like New York Times journalism standards. It's like, wait, have you... I'm like, it's just a fucking joke. Like, I'm not. I've
gone. I used to just not give a fuck about people smearing me, but now I've gone beyond not giving a fuck. I like, is this what you don't want me to say? And I'm going purposefully going after the things that people don't want.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I see a value in that, Armin. So it's not even. It's not. So I hold the position that I hold, and I think partially, I definitely. Do what I do because of my position as again as executive director of the, like, I mean, I don't think it's not a stretch to say at all that we're the ex-Muslim organization that has like true muscle behind it,
right?
You know, and we've been around for some time, and we can make like we have a big voice, you know, a big platform. And I think that means that we have a big responsibility as well. Yeah, right. So that's certainly a part of it. So I see value in what you're doing and the way that you approach things. And I think some people should, you know, and I hate this practice of holding your enemies, like, you know, accountable to what you said, you know, Ali, to a New York Times journalism standard, but you're holding your friends to completely different, you know, standards. I think you should approach everyone as if they're human, and, you know, and see their work as a holistic thing, as this broad thing, and I'm shocked that this is so hard for people to accept and understand.
You know, like, I get all of this mail telling me, like, why are you associating with Armin? You know, he's like sympathetic to Nazis or sympathetic to Zionists. I don't know. Nobody knows which side he's sympathetic to. And then he's like far right, and then he gets all these messages like, "Why, you know, Ali is totally
that's
regressive."
That's the beauty about what you guys are doing, and I think I think you should continue being you and continue doing this thing, because I don't
know how to be anybody else. You know? Like, so anyway,
conference, yes, because we're running out of time.
The Rights and Religions Conference, everybody who's listening, it's on October 19th, Saturday, October 19th in New York City. You have two other really impressive women that you're working with.
Before you say that, the reason why you should go to this conference, to this conference is because you haven't met, most of you that have followed Sarah, you haven't met Sarah. Okay, because when me and Ali and other people, when we go to Amsterdam and the panel is over and we go and have fun and we're drinking and we're eating and we're just talking, like Sarah has opinions on so many different things and they're so interesting. And I know that now that she's having a conference where she gets to control what she gets to say, I think now you're going to see the more interesting opinions that she's going to be able to present freely, right? Like, I think, like, Sarah is an intellectual that is waiting to be discovered. She's way more than, she's just way, no, honestly, like, I'm not just saying that just to become, like, she's not just the founder of ex-Muslims of North America. She's a lot more than that. And I think this conference would be very, very interesting. So go check it out. If you're in New York, and you don't check out this conference, you're missing out. You're missing out. So, all right, go on, Ali. Sorry.
There's here. That's amazing, Armin. Thank you. So there's you're working with two actually pretty impressive women. The first is Tora Bontrager. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And she was raised traditional Amish. And then Malky Schwartz, who I think I've met too before. She was a founder of Footsteps, and now she's moving on doing other things. So you teamed up with them to actually do this conference called "When Rights and Religions Collide," which is a fantastic title. So how did you end up getting together with them? And you guys do seem like you have a lot in common.
Tora, she was raised. I think it's Old Order Amish. I think that's a specific branch of the Amish. But she was raised Amish, traditionally Amish, and then she's just, her story, for those who want to look her up, she's just this incredibly strong person who ran away and empowered herself, and got an education, and now, as of I think it's been 2 years, but it's relatively new. She just started an organization called the Amish Heritage Foundation, and she's assisting people who are leaving behind, the Amish faith, and similar to what XMNA is doing, not exactly right, but the spirit is the same. That there are people who are walking away and who need assistance, social assistance and support, and she's also doing a lot of educational work. She invited me to her inaugural conference. A year ago. It feels like forever ago, but it was a year ago. And I was so excited about this. It was such a weird little thing to be invited to. I didn't know about Amish at all, but it happened that I was doing an AMA or something, or some sort of live thing, and there was somebody who asked me a question on it, and he was ex-Amish, and he asked me about some ex-Amish related things, and it was a really interesting question. I answered that question, and then he connected me with Tora, and was, I think, advocated for me to be on their little conference. And it was a small conference in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, like in the heart of Amish country there, and it was so fascinating to get a look into the life of, or the experiences of people who are in this very, very, like high control community. And it was like walking into some, like Alice in Wonderland kind of a thing, where everything is similar, but it's not similar at all. Like, it's completely different. It's completely warped, but it's also, it's also things that you're familiar with, right? Like, there's a cat. Yeah, it's the same, but it's talking. Like, it was just so, it was so, it was such a unique
similar
experience.
To ex-Muslim experience, you're saying, like similar to the ex-Muslim experience, but also
similar
different.
To ex-Muslim, yeah, similar to the ex-Muslim experience. I don't think an outsider of somebody who has no experience with religions at all, like high control religions, can really it can really feel like there's anything at all that's the same. But to me, I felt that way, and it was fascinating to see that the same kinds of appeals were there, but the particulars were different, right? Like in the ways in which they manifested the same kind of social controls and shame and stigma and whatever, they manifested in different ways and became different traditions, but ultimately they were touching on the same, fundamental, human needs and wants and desires, and so that was so incredible. So I was there, and Malky was there as well. And Malky is a founder of Footsteps, and Footsteps is an organization that assists ex-Hasidic, Orthodox Jews. and so she I think she has a similar experience where I was like, wow, there's so much here that we have that's so similar, and so it's so interesting that we have all these challenges when it comes to representing our population in a legal realm, right? And especially in the United States, where we have a lot of religious freedom, we have a lot of liberty, and religious groups can, like something like the Westboro Baptist Church, can exist in the United States where it might be banned in other places, right? I think it's banned in Canada; they can't enter. So there are other countries that have restrictions on speech, but we don't, and we allow our religions to have a lot of freedom, right? So in the Amish context, that means that they're not educated past the 8th grade, which is wild. Like, I think that's incredible that exists. Good, yeah.
I was going to say there's a community called in Kiryas Joel, and it's a Hasidic Jewish community where women are not allowed to drive. So all the law enforcement is part of the community. Everything is completely almost isolated in the middle of New York State. Where that happens. So you're right. I mean, that and the Westboro Baptist Church, I gotta say, I mean, the Supreme Court actually had this decision, an 8-1 decision, where they said that they should be allowed to picket funerals as long as it's at a distance. But you're right, and it's a hard trade-off because you have free speech, then it also allows all of these. I mean, we had Ron Miscavige on the show, the father of the guy who heads the Scientology church. And on this podcast, and he was talking about how he escaped and what a cult-like situation it was with the kids and everything there as well. I mean, these slaves are. Yeah, go ahead.
The similarities between these actually does suggest that that these are not designed, right? Because the survival of these memes, the ones that do survive are the ones that work perfectly with human psychology, and because humans need and desire similar things and can be controlled in similar ways, the same types of tactics survive, and that's why Muslims and all of a sudden Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons, they end up using the same tactics even though they haven't talked to each other, because it's not designed, it's just a survival of the memes,
right. And our ex communities, our individual ex communities feel as if we're in similar boats, even though they look very different, but it's like, we're navigating the same paths together. And so for myself and Malki and Tora, it was just this, like, we got like a half an hour to just talk, the three of us, at the end of that conference, and it was just so interesting. We all expressed different ways of saying the same thing, which is to say that we feel misunderstood by mainstream society. We feel as if there's a bystander effect that's happening in mainstream culture. But of course, like that there's these things that happen, but it's just them. It's just all these little Amish. This is their culture, and it's so quaint. And look at these practices, and now we get to learn about a different culture, and that's it. And then you move on, and you don't think about the kid who never got educated past the 8th grade, and now even if they wanted to leave, their path out would be incredibly difficult. You don't think about the Muslim girl who's been covering since she was 8 and doesn't know anything else, and gets married by the time she's 17, 18, and can but it's just this culture. It's this
Warren Jeffs in the Mormon community, like he was brought out and he'd been getting married to all these underage girls, like not legally married, but
Mormons,
fundamentalist Mormons. So, and that's why I think the title of this actually really hits the nail on the head: the rights and religions, when rights and religions collide. And we're all free speech advocates, and we all want religious freedom. We all support that, right? Even though we're not religious. But what do you do about these sort of societies that are these communities that are enclaves, where there are kids?
Right, they're being abused, up, right?
Nobody knows what's happening just because we're respecting their right to religious freedom. And on a broader scale, we talk about circumcision here a lot. It's simple. That's something on a mass scale that parents do to their kids as well. The FGM thing is also...
The FGM thing is pretty... I mean, that's an extreme case, right? I think it's easier to make a case on FGM, but you're right that there are a lot of... These are a lot of tensions, and these are not questions... So one of the reasons I wanted to host this conference is that these are not questions I have answers to, necessarily. Yeah. They're truly something that I don't know where this line should be drawn, and I don't know to what extent there should be legal changes, or there should be social changes, or, you know, like the government is involved or social services are involved in some specific cases or instances. I mean, I think these are really, really interesting questions. And I'm kind of, you know, an extremist. I think we're, you know, as you said, Ellie, we're all free speech people. I think that's free to say. I think I'm even in that, the general ex-Muslims are usually free speech people. I think I would still be pretty singular. That I'm pretty far on the side of civil liberties, and to the extent that I call myself a civil libertarian, because that actually is an identity that I would put on myself. But that's something that, so for me, as somebody who's a civil libertarian, it's very hard to also think about the experiences of the ex-Muslims. I know that they're suffering, you know, and it's very hard to then look the other way and say, well, don't we as a society have a responsibility? And I mean, is freedom for freedom's sake something that should be valued, or is there a way to make a compromise, or, you know, are there, you know, what is the point of having this free speech, you know, fundamentalist approach anyway? I think these are and I think the most interesting question to me is, what constitutes a free choice, you know? And then you'll have Sam Harris, who says there's no free will, right? So nobody's ever making a free choice.
No, but forget about that. But even in the discussion of the choices as we think, I actually agree with them. But in any case, even so, that aside, if we're thinking about choices in the general mainstream public concept of choice, right? The first people who decided that we're going to adopt this Amish way of life, they were, I think, the ones where you can say without, you know, question that they had a choice. They had a real choice to adopt these values and live this way of life. The second it became a community and they had kids, right, who are brought up in that lifestyle, right,
then you have something that's different, you know? I mean, then the choice, whatever a choice is, becomes so much more complicated.
It's not complicated. It's not. No, Ali. So wait, Ali. Wait. No, I have to say this. The red line is pretty. The red line is pretty straightforward. I think you have freedom. You have freedom for yourself. You don't own your kids. You don't own your own kids.
But the kids they can't survive on their own, right? No. So we in our society think that if you are the guardian of someone, if you are responsible for them,
a good guardian. I think when it comes to freedom, this is my red line. You have the freedom to do whatever you want to yourself, or live the way you want, or believe what you want. But guardians, we don't give. If a parent starts beating the shit out of their kids, we don't be like, well, you're the guardian. No, the government start. No, the government. I'm giving it. Ali. No, you have to wait. Yeah. The reason why I'm giving such an extreme example is to say, like, when it comes to freedom, where does the government steps in? The government. What's the role of the government? The government's role is to protect its citizens from harm. Okay, and the main citizens that the government needs to protect are the ones that cannot protect themselves, that's children. The parents are responsible. They're the guardians of the children unless they're irresponsible as their role.
But those are all terms that are not as easy to define.
But that's obviously
what is harm.
But that's obviously the place that we need to define them. Like when it comes to where your freedoms stop. Obviously, your freedoms stop when it starts influencing another human being. Okay, especially the children,
parents and kids. Of course, everything I do is if I have a kid. I'm setting an example for them. They're living in my house in a specific way. Okay, how general? I mean, that's a very slippery slope you're walking.
Slippery slope. Slippery slope is a logical fallacy. Just a reminder. But go on, Ali.
Okay, sure, Armin. So, as someone who has a kid, and I've worked with hospital. I used to do autopsies on kids who died because of all kinds of reasons. So these things are they're legally defined, And you're right. They really push them to one side. For instance, if there is a life-threatening illness, if a Jehovah's Witness comes in and the kid needs a blood transfusion to save their life, then the parental authority becomes completely dismissed.
Yes.
And then you go in and you give them the transfusion. However, if the kid just has an illness that's not necessarily life-threatening, and a blood transfusion would really, really help, but the parents say no, religious reasons, then they're going to give them a substitute. That's the point. They really push it to the point where it's actually life-threatening, and that's a problem. That's where this whole rights and religions collide.
So, right.
Thing
I mean,
maybe.
So here's the thing. Maybe it isn't a problem
legally,
right? Like maybe it isn't a problem. Maybe it is, but maybe it isn't. So I think that
it is a problem.
So
yeah.
I don't. So there's trade-offs, right? So it is the case that you can set these lines and you can draw this line in the sand in a certain position, but then they have indirect effects that I am, again, as a civil libertarian, uncomfortable with. Like I'm uncomfortable with giving the government too much power, period. And I think that what you're saying, what you were saying, Armin, I mean, that alarm bells are going off in my head when you're telling me that it's the government's duty to prevent harm to their citizen. I mean, I think in a very specific sense, yes. But I think in a broad sense, that could mean a lot of things, right? I mean, you could say fascist governments could say that we are preventing harm as we define it,
Well, an example.
No, I mean, I'm a free market capitalist. I know a lot of people hate that. I'm for limited government, and I just think that governments shouldn't run things. That the role of the government is to protect its citizens and create an environment where everything could happen freely, like police, army, But so I'm for limiting the government's role, but I also understand the government needs to have a role, right? And these are the few areas where the government has to have a role. I think this is one of them. If kids are being mistreated, the government has to step in. If kids are not being taken care of, the government needs to step in. I say that as somebody that is for limited government, I'm saying this is the role of the government to step in here.
Right. So that's one of the things that in the conference we're going to have our keynote speaker is Marcy Hamilton, who works for Child USA, which is a child advocacy organization where this is her focus, that the government, she thinks, are abandoning kids in the United States, especially under the guise of religious freedom. And you have kids that are getting married when they're 14 years old because they have consent of the parents and the consent of the judge. And that's, you can say that is deeply damaging. I mean, how developed are 14-year-olds? How able are they? Is there a reason that we deny them such a right?
And I think that the pro-life, pro-choice thing becomes really interesting here too, because what you're saying is that parents, they don't have a choice in terms of what's going inside their body, but once it comes out, they can do whatever you want to them. It's sort of contradictory from the libertarian perspective. A fetus, if you consider a fetus a human being, then from a libertarian perspective,
they're not
doing anything.
I mean, they don't have,
Armin, that's a controversy. That's the point, right? So the thing is, if you consider that, then it is actually murder. Then they do think of it as murder, but for some reason, the same libertarians want to be completely hands-off when it comes to these sort of enclave communities where the kids are.
Those guys aren't libertarians. You're talking about conservatives who are libertarians when they want to be. Yeah.
Exactly. Sarah, yes, true.
No, but that's my point. My point is that a lot of these people who think that they're libertarians are really not. Right. Yeah, I mean, the fact that you like Ron Paul and Rand Paul examples. Anyway, that's a different thing. Yeah.
If anybody that says it's my kids, I can raise them however I want. That's a red flag for me, because I'm like, you don't own that. That's not your property. If you're not taking care of it properly, you need to be separated from that citizen of this country, which me as the government am supposed to protect. Okay, it's your kid. Well, it's my citizen. There you go.
Yeah, I'll take my kid to daycare. So
I think it's really complicated. Right. I think it's really complicated, and I think that line is not as easy to draw as maybe it
I
should
know it's
be.
not easy,
and
but
that's what we're here to investigate at this conference, and that's why we have a lot of interesting speakers, most of whom come from the perspective of, I think they would come from the perspective of Armin, and and I think probably Ali also, that and mine, right? I'm split. I have a lot of thoughts about this, but I don't know.
This conference just became a lot more interesting.
Armin, that was the last word.
No, is that going to be recorded? No, wait. I want to ask about the conference. This conference seems, based on everything we're saying and discussing here, and seems like there's going to be a lot of nuance in this conference, and I'm going to miss it. I'm in Philippines. I'm not in New York. But is it going to be recorded?
It's going to be recorded. We're going to have them eventually up on YouTube. But again, it's like we would prefer that people are there in person so we can have it's small. It's going to be intimate on purpose by design. It's intimate. So I think there should be a lot of good conversations. A lot of and of course the perspectives are heavy from people who are recovering from religion. So there is that voice is going to be loud and proud. And I think that it doesn't always get enough.
So I'm being selfish because I can't be there. I want it to be recorded. But guys, if you're in New York and you say like, "Oh, it's going to be recorded, so I'm not going to go," you're being very selfish, okay? Because even if you, first of all, please record it. If you're recording it, release it like 6 months later, so there's some motivation for people to go. But also, just go there. Even if you think you're going to see it online somewhere, you have to buy the ticket to this if you're in New York. If you want more conferences like this to happen, you have to make them financially feasible for more conferences like this to happen. So go there so that you can at least support this conference so that you can see more of it happening in the future. Please, we need more of this, right?
So I think if you like this conversation that was happening, that I had to cattle prod because I'm trying to keep time as well. My apologies for that. But if you want to hear more of it, I mean, that was a teaser, and you're going to hear, because I think this is an absolutely fascinating conversation. As a pathologist, and we used to have this conversation all the time because we had to go to courts and provide reports on autopsies and things like that. So it's something that's actually very interesting to me personally. So anyway, we're going to take just 2 patron questions. Sarah, you okay with that?
Sure. Let's do it.
Sorry to the rest of the patrons who asked more questions, but so the first one's from Stephen T. He's saying, besides donating money to ex-Muslims of North America, what is the next best thing for other atheists who aren't ex-Muslims to do to support ex-Muslims?
Well, I mean, the easy question is share our work, right? But also participate in the dialogue. I think that there are a lot of people, and we have this culture of not participating and not talking about this if you don't belong, if you don't come from that specific community. But I think that's just not true. And lead by example by getting, being messy and being brave and and have the conversation that you want to have. And maybe you'll just muck it up and it'll be terrible. But we have to all participate in issues that affect all of us, and Islam definitely does. So we should all be having these conversations.
Okay, perfect. And Sohan is asking, this is the last one, and this I guess is to both of you, not to start this conversation up again, but I'm reading the question. How much nice should a religion have before you stop calling it sugarcoating? 10%, 50%, 90%?
Okay, so my problem was with the literal word sugarcoating because it implies design, right? An Advil is covered in sugar so that you don't eat the bitter in the so you don't taste the bitter and you can swallow it easily. If you suck on an Advil for like 10 seconds, you'll taste the bitter, the sugar will go away, and then you'll have the bitter and you'll want to vomit immediately, right? What I didn't like about that term is that it implied as if there's a real rotten inner core that's hidden, but I think that's not hidden. I think they're all infused, and it's just this.
That's what's so insidious about it.
That's what's insidious about it. I think that's what makes it what's a very difficult problem and kind of intractable to some degree, right? So if we're all secularists trying to do what we can to remove religious influence in our life, and I think it's a harder deal than what is just presented by saying, oh, well, they're liars and they don't tell the truth and they're abusing young women. And I'm not saying that Armin was saying that. I'm just saying that I think it's important to acknowledge the aspects of that religion gets right. That when it gets them really right, and how it gets them right, and to understand deeply, in looking at it from their perspective, and in the perspective of an ideological meme surviving, so you can investigate them both those perspectives. But if the sugarcoating thing, the reason I push back on that is because to me it's very much like, oh, these religious people, they're trying to trick people. No. And I know that's what you're not saying, but it struck me that way, which is why.
But I try to always make that clear that I don't imply design, but I mean, it's just looks design.
Sugarcoating implies it. I will mention sugarcoating, but I also keep adding that I always mention that I don't think these are designed. I keep telling my meme, the survival of the memes, it looks designed, just like in evolution. You see things that it looks designed, even though it's not designed. And I do agree religions things get right. I just try to take those and say, like, I don't want people to use that as a way to promote religion, the things that they get right. I want to take those things and show people how they're possible without religion, and they're done in better ways without religion. But I'm not going to continue. I know Ali is trying to make me stop. But can we read some of the compliments? Can I read some of the compliments in the?
Yeah. Go for it.
Okay, Sean is saying, Sarah, you're an inspiration. Love your courage, views, humanity. Where did it go? And activism, thank you for hanging out with us too. Jim is saying, I could listen to Sarah, an intellectual waiting to be found. Oh, that's quoting me, what I said. For hours, she is rational and doesn't pretend to know or have all the answers. There's a lot more compliments here, but I just read 2 of them. But yeah.
Okay, so, thank you. That was a nice way to end the conversation.
Yeah. So Sarah, thank you very much. We're going to put a link to the conference and everything else, all the other good stuff that you're doing. Yeah. Anything in the future for XM&A? Anything you want to announce before we go?
I mean, we have a report coming up that'll be really fascinating. I'll be sure to tell you guys about it when it happens, and then maybe myself or Mohammed or someone can be back up on to discuss it. I think that'll be really, really fascinating to your listeners. So that's coming up for sure. Lots of things in the works. Stay tuned. Follow our mailing list. Go on ex-Muslims.org and sign up, and you'll hear about it.
What's the URL?
The website is xmuslims.org, and then all of our handles for all of our social media accounts are xmuslims.org. That's what they all are. So look up xmuslims.org and you'll find us.
Right.
Excellent.
And just one last thing, thanks to our patrons in the live chat and the ones that didn't manage to come listen to this live. You guys make these conversations possible. Thank you. And if you're not a patron, please consider becoming one today.
Okay. And thanks very much, Sarah. Stay on for just a second. And then, we're going to say bye. See you guys next time.
The secular jihadists have been made possible thanks to the Illuminati and the covert support of Israel and the CIA. That's what we have been told, but we haven't received our checks yet. If you like what we do, please support us. Share the podcast with your friends. Write and tweet us with topic and guest suggestions. Or head over to secularjihadists.com and give $1 or more for exclusive access to live video. Have your questions read and answered on the air, and more. Till next time, may the flying spaghetti monster be with you.